They tied her between two oaks and used her for target practice until the Comanche hunter rode in and said, "Cut her down or I shoot you, New Mexico territory." 1878. The sun burned white and merciless over the flats near San Marcos, a town built on dust, greed, and the kind of silence that comes after too many bodies have been buried without questions. The heat shimmered in waves across the cracked earth, turning the horizon into a liquid blur. Two massive oak trees stood alone in the wasteland, their branches twisted and blackened by years of drought and lightning strikes. Between them, a woman hung. Sylvia Price dangled from ropes that bit deep into her wrists, arms stretched wide and tied to each tree. Her feet hovered inches above the ground, toes scraping uselessly at the dirt. Her dress, once a modest gray cotton, was torn and stained with blood and dust. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, her lips split open. Her auburn hair hung in matted tangles across her shoulders. She didn't scream anymore. She had no voice left. Around her, a crowd had gathered. 30, maybe 40 people. Men in worn vests and gun belts, women clutching shawls despite the heat, children peeking between their parents' legs with wide, curious eyes. They hadn't come for justice. They had come for a show. One man stood closest to her, a bottle of whiskey in one hand, a revolver in the other. His name was Clayton Rourke, the town's self-appointed enforcer, a man whose word carried more weight than any badge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard streaked with gray and eyes that held no mercy. He raised the gun lazily, squinting through the glare. "Let's see if I can clip her ear without killing her," he said, voice slurred but steady enough. The crowd laughed. Someone whistled. A woman in a bonnet turned away but didn't leave. Sylvia's head lolled forward. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Her lips moved. No one listened. Clayton cocked the hammer. The click was loud in the stillness. He aimed, finger tightening on the trigger. Then a sound cut through the air. Not a gunshot. Hooves. The crowd turned. From the ridge to the east, a figure appeared, riding slowly down the slope. The horse was a paint, black and white, moving with deliberate calm. The rider sat tall, shoulders square, his long black hair tied back with a strip of leather. He wore buckskin leggings, a faded cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. A rifle rested across his saddle, and a knife hung at his belt. Pakawa. Lone Wolf, a Comanche hunter known across 3 territories for his tracking skills and his silence. He worked alone, lived alone, and spoke only when words mattered. He rode into the clearing without hurry, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a man who knew how to read danger. His gaze settled on Sylvia, then on Clayton, then on the gun still pointed at her. The crowd parted without thinking. Something about the way he moved, the way he sat his horse, made people step back. Clayton lowered the gun slightly, his grin fading. "This ain't your business, Indian." Pakawa said nothing. He dismounted in one smooth motion, boots hitting the ground without sound. He walked forward, slow and steady, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. "I said this ain't your business," Clayton repeated. Louder now, trying to reclaim control, Pakawa stopped 10 feet away. His voice, when it came, was low and cold as winter stone. "Cut her down," Clayton blinked. "What?" "Cut her down," Pakawa repeated, his eyes never leaving Clayton's face. "Or I shoot you." The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Clayton's face flushed red. He raised the gun, this time pointing it at Pakawa. "You threatening me, boy?" Pakawa didn't flinch. His hand moved, not fast, just certain. In one motion, he drew the rifle from his saddle sling and leveled it at Clayton's chest. The barrel didn't waver. "Last chance," Pakawa said. Clayton's hand trembled. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He looked around, seeking support, but no one moved. No one spoke. They all knew what a Comanche hunter could do with a rifle. They had heard the stories. Stories of men who had crossed him and were never seen again. Stories of tracks that disappeared into stone. Stories of justice delivered in silence. "Fine," Clayton spat, lowering his gun. "Cut the bitch down yourself." Pakawa didn't lower his rifle. He nodded toward one of the men in the crowd. "You. Cut the ropes." The man, a scrawny fellow with a nervous twitch, hesitated, then scrambled forward with a knife. He sawed through the rope on Sylvia's left wrist first. Her arm dropped, and she cried out weakly. Then the right rope. She collapsed into the dirt, gasping. Pakawa kept the rifle trained on Clayton until the ropes were cut. Only then did he step forward, slinging the rifle back over his shoulder. He crouched beside Sylvia, his movements careful. She flinched when he touched her arm, but he didn't pull away. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, tears streaking through the dirt on her face. He slipped one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his chest. He turned and walked back to his horse. Clayton's voice rang out behind him. "You'll regret this, Hunter. She's a thief and a liar. She stole from the land office. She's wanted by the law." Pakawa paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Then the law can come find me." He lifted Sylvia onto the horse, climbed up behind her, and without another word, rode north into the hills. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the dust swallowed them whole. Clayton stood in the clearing, fists clenched, watching the horizon long after the hunter had disappeared. His face was red with humiliation and rage. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, casting nervous glances back at him. "Who does he think he is?" Clayton muttered, more to himself than anyone else, a younger man. One of Clayton's regular drinking companions stepped forward. "Want me to round up a posse?" "We can track them." Clayton shook his head slowly, his jaw working. "No, not yet. Let them run. Let them think they're safe. We'll find them when the time's right. And when we do, that Indian's gonna wish he'd minded his own damn business." He turned and stalked back toward town, his boots kicking up dust with every angry step. Behind him, the two oak trees stood empty, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The ropes still hung from their limbs, frayed ends dancing like ghosts. The cabin sat hidden in a narrow canyon, sheltered by juniper trees and red rock walls that rose like ancient guards. A spring trickled nearby, feeding a small pool of clear water. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, thin and lazy against the evening sky. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of sage and pine. A fire crackled in the hearth. Pakawa knelt beside a low cot where Sylvia lay, covered with a wool blanket. Her breathing was shallow but steady. He had cleaned the blood from her face and wrapped her wrists in strips of cloth soaked in yarrow and comfrey. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she panicked, not recognizing where she was. Then she saw him, sitting cross-legged by the fire, sharpening his knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Safe," he said without looking up. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "Why did you help me?" He paused, testing the blade with his thumb. "Because no one else would." She stared at him, trying to make sense of it. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he said. He set the knife aside and stood, pouring water from a clay jug into a tin cup. He brought it to her, holding it steady as she drank. She finished it in 3 gulps. "They said I stole from the land office," she said, her voice cracking. "That's not true. I worked there. I kept the records. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see." Pakawa sat back down, his expression unreadable. "What things?" She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "Deeds, falsified deeds. Ranches stolen, land grants forged, signatures faked. The land commissioner, Marcus Thorne, he's been selling parcels that don't belong to him. He's been taking from farmers, from widows, even from the Mescalero Apache. He's gotten rich off it. Paco's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I found a ledger, she continued. It had everything. Names, dates, amounts. I made a copy. I was going to send it to the territorial governor in Santa Fe, but someone saw me. They told Thorne. He accused me of stealing, said I was a fraud, and put a bounty on my head. I ran. I hid for 3 days. Then they caught me. And they strung you up. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. They were going to kill me, slowly, as a warning to anyone else who might talk. Paco stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening canyon. Where is the ledger now? I hid it, she said. In the old mission church. Under the floorboards in the sacristy. No one goes there anymore. It's been abandoned for years. He turned to face her. They will come looking for you. I know, she whispered. And they will come looking for me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't ask you to save me. I don't even know why you did. He was quiet for a long time. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and heavy with something she couldn't name. I had a sister, he said. Her name was Nadua. She was taken by soldiers when she was 15. They said she attacked a settler. She didn't. She was gathering roots. They hanged her from a cottonwood tree and left her there for 3 days. I found her too late. Sylvia's breath caught. I swore I would never stand by again, he said. Not for anyone. She didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. She just looked at him, this man who had appeared from nowhere, who had risked his life for a stranger, who carried grief like a stone in his chest. After a while, he turned back to the fire. Rest, he said. Tomorrow we decide what comes next. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. But before sleep took her, she whispered, Thank you. He didn't answer. But the firelight caught the faint nod of his head. The night deepened. Outside, the canyon filled with the sounds of darkness. Crickets sang their endless chorus. An owl called from somewhere high in the rocks, its voice echoing off stone. The spring bubbled softly, a constant whisper in the stillness. Paco sat by the fire long after Sylvia had fallen asleep. He didn't sleep much anymore. Hadn't for years. Sleep brought dreams, and dreams brought memories he'd rather leave buried. He thought about his sister. About the way she used to laugh, the way she sang while grinding corn, the way she had looked at him with trust in her eyes the day the soldiers came. He had been hunting. Miles away. By the time he returned, she was already gone. He had tracked the soldiers for 2 weeks. Found her body swinging from that tree, her face unrecognizable, her hands still bound. He had cut her down and buried her at a place only he knew. Then he had disappeared into the wild, living alone, hunting alone, speaking to no one, until today. He looked over at Sylvia, her face peaceful in sleep despite the bruises. She reminded him of Nadua. Not in appearance, but in something else. A kind of stubborn courage. A refusal to bend even when the world tried to break her. He stood and walked to the door, stepping out into the night. The air was cool, almost cold. Stars filled the sky, more stars than anyone could count. He scanned the horizon, listening, watching. They would come eventually. Men like Clayton Rourke didn't let things go. They festered. They plotted. They waited for the right moment, but Paco had survived this long by being patient. By being smarter. By never underestimating the cruelty of men. He would be ready, inside the cabin. Sylvia stirred in her sleep, murmuring something too quiet to hear. Paco glanced back at her, then returned his gaze to the darkness. Somewhere far below, in the town of San Marcos, men were gathering. Men with guns and bad intentions. Men who did not like to be defied. The storm was coming. Dawn broke cold and sharp over the canyon. Sylvia woke to the smell of coffee and cornmeal cooking over the fire. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt, and her wrists throbbed beneath the bandages. She sat up slowly, every movement deliberate, and found Pakawa crouched by the hearth, stirring something in a blackened pot. He glanced at her but said nothing. Just ladled the mixture into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. It was some kind of porridge, thick and grainy, with bits of dried berries mixed in. She took it with both hands, grateful for the warmth. "You need to eat," he said. "We leave in an hour." She blinked, still groggy. "Leave? Where?" "The mission church. You said the ledger is there." "We get it before they do." Sylvia's stomach twisted. "They'll be watching the church. Marcus Thorne isn't stupid. He knows that's where I'd hide something." Pakawa poured himself coffee from a dented tin pot. "Then we go at night. But first, you learn to ride and shoot. You can't stay helpless." She stared at him. "I'm not helpless." He met her eyes, his expression flat. "You were strung up between two trees. You couldn't fight back. That's the definition of helpless." The words stung, but she couldn't argue. She looked down at the bowl in her hands, shame burning in her chest. "I'm a clerk. I keep records. I'm not a fighter. You will be," he said simply. "Or you'll die." After she finished eating, he handed her a belt with a holster attached. Inside was a revolver, worn but clean, the metal polished smooth from use. She took it hesitantly, the weight foreign in her hand. "It was my sister's," Pakawa said quietly. "She never got to use it." Sylvia looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them. She nodded and strapped the belt around her waist. It hung awkwardly on her hips, too loose, but he adjusted it without a word. They walked outside into the pale morning light. The canyon was still shadowed, the sun just beginning to touch the tops of the red rock walls. Pakawa led her to a flat stretch of ground near the spring, where he had set up a row of stones on a fallen log. "First lesson," he said. "Draw the gun." She fumbled with the holster, her fingers clumsy. The revolver caught on the leather, and she had to yank it free. He shook his head. Again, she tried again. And again. And again. By the 10th attempt, her hand was steadier, the motion smoother. He watched without comment, only nodding when she finally drew cleanly. "Now load it," he said, handing her a handful of cartridges. She opened the cylinder, her hands shaking slightly, and slid the bullets into place one by one. It took longer than it should have, but she managed. He showed her how to cock the hammer, how to aim down the sight, how to squeeze the trigger without jerking. "Breathe out when you fire," he said. "Let the recoil move through you. Don't fight it." She lined up the first stone, held her breath, and pulled the trigger. The gun kicked hard, the shot going wide and splintering bark off a juniper tree 20 feet to the right. The noise echoed through the canyon, harsh and startling. Again. She fired again. Missed again. Her hands were sweating now, her arms tired. But Pakawa didn't let her stop. He stood behind her, adjusting her grip, her stance, the angle of her shoulders. "You're gripping too tight. Loosen your fingers. Let the gun sit in your hand like it belongs there." She tried. Fired. Missed. Again. The sun climbed higher. Sweat dripped down her back, despite the cool morning air. Her wrists ached from the recoil, and her ears rang from the constant gunfire. But slowly, painfully, she began to improve. The shots came closer to the targets. One bullet grazed a stone, sending it tumbling. Another hit dead center, shattering it into pieces. Pakawa said nothing, but she saw the slight nod of approval. It was enough. By the time the sun had climbed halfway up the sky, she had gone through 2 boxes of ammunition. Her ears rang. Her wrists burned. But she had hit 7 stones out of the last 10 shots. 7 out of 10. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. "You'll get better," Pakawa said, reloading the revolver for her. You have to. They returned to the cabin, and he handed her a canteen and a strip of dried meat. Rest. We ride this afternoon. She sat on the step outside the cabin, chewing the tough meat and staring out at the canyon. Her mind churned with fear and doubt. She wasn't a gunfighter. She wasn't brave. She was just a woman who had stumbled onto something bigger than herself. And now people wanted her dead for it, but Pakawa was right. She couldn't stay helpless. She couldn't rely on him to save her every time. If she was going to survive this, she had to learn to fight. She had to become someone new. Someone stronger. That afternoon, he brought out his horse. The paintmar and Kita stood calm and patient as Pakawa saddled her. Sylvia approached cautiously, reaching out to touch the mare's neck. The horse turned her head, dark eyes curious but unafraid. She's beautiful, Sylvia said softly. She's saved my life more times than I can count, Pakawa replied. She's fast, smart, and she doesn't spook easy. You need to learn to ride like her life depends on it. Because it will. He helped Sylvia mount, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. She gripped the reins tightly, her knuckles white. Relax, he said. The horse feels your fear. If you're tense, she'll be tense. Breathe. Let your body move with hers. They started at a walk, circling the clearing near the cabin. Pakawa walked alongside, giving instructions, correcting her posture. After a few circuits, he mounted behind her, his arms guiding hers. Feel the rhythm, he said, his voice low near her ear. It's like breathing. In and out. Rise and fall. They moved to a trot, then a canter. The world blurred around her, wind whipping her hair back. Fear spiked through her chest, but beneath it, something else emerged. Excitement, power, freedom. By the time they slowed to a walk again, her heart was pounding, her face flushed. Pakawa dismounted and looked up at her. Better, he said. Much better. She smiled, a real smile, the first in days. I felt like I was flying. Good. Remember that feeling. When we ride tonight, you'll need it. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Pakawa checked his weapons, sharpened his knife, packed supplies into saddlebags. Sylvia watched him work, noticing the careful precision of every movement. Nothing wasted. Nothing rushed. Can I ask you something? She said. He didn't look up from the knife he was sharpening. You can ask. Why did you really save me? The truth. His hands stilled. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set the knife down and looked at her. Because I've spent 5 years running from ghosts, he said. 5 years hiding in canyons and hunting game and pretending the world doesn't exist. And when I saw you hanging between those trees, I saw my sister. I saw every person I failed to save. And I thought, not this time. Not again. Sylvia's throat tightened. You didn't fail your sister. I wasn't there, he said flatly. That's failure enough. You can't save everyone, I know. But I can try. They fell into silence, the weight of loss and regret hanging between them. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and gold. As night fell, they prepared to leave. Pakawa packed supplies into saddlebags while Sylvia checked the revolver, loading it carefully the way he had shown her. Her hands didn't shake this time. Stay close to me, he said as they mounted up. If shooting starts, you get low and you ride hard. Don't try to be a hero. I'm not a hero, she said quietly. Good. Heroes die fast. They rode out of the canyon under a sky thick with stars. The moon hadn't risen yet, and the darkness was absolute. Sylvia's senses sharpened, every sound amplified. The soft thud of hooves on packed earth. The distant howl of a coyote. The whisper of wind through the junipers. Pakawa rode ahead, his silhouette barely visible against the night sky. She followed, trusting him to guide them safely. They moved in silence, speaking only when necessary, their voices low and cautious. After an hour, they reached a ridge overlooking San Marcos. The town sprawled below them, a scattering of lights against the dark plain. Most buildings were dark, but a few showed lamplight in windows. The saloon was still open, voices and laughter drifting faintly on the wind. Pakawa reined in, studying the layout. The church is on the far side. We come in from the north, stay low, move fast. Sylvia nodded, her heart hammering. What if they're waiting for us? Then we fight, he said simply. They descended the ridge, picking their way carefully through loose rock and scrub brush. The mission church sat on the outskirts of San Marcos, a crumbling structure of adobe and stone that had been abandoned years ago when the parish moved into town. Its roof sagged in places, and the wooden cross above the entrance hung crooked, barely clinging to its moorings. Weeds choked the courtyard, and the heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar. One hinge broken, Pakawa reined in at the edge of the tree line, his eyes scanning the building and the surrounding area. No lights, no movement. But that didn't mean they were alone. Wait here, he whispered. No, Sylvia said firmly. I'm coming with you. He looked at her measuring, then nodded once. Stay behind me. Step where I step. Make no sound. They dismounted and approached on foot, moving like shadows through the overgrown grass. Pakawa's hand rested on the knife at his belt, his body coiled and ready. Sylvia's hand hovered near the revolver, her breath shallow. They reached the door. Pakawa pushed it open slowly, wincing as the old wood creaked. Inside, the church was dark and smelled of damp stone and decay. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, casting pale beams across broken pews and a cracked altar. Dust hung in the air, thick and choking. Sylvia led the way to the sacristy, a small room behind the altar where the priest used to prepare for Mass. The door hung off one hinge. Inside, the floor was covered in dirt and leaves. She knelt in the corner, her fingers searching the floorboards until she found the loose one. She pried it up carefully and froze. The hiding place was empty. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. No, it was here. I put it here myself. Pakawa knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Are you sure this is the right spot? Yes, I'm sure. It's gone. Someone found it. A voice cut through the darkness, cold and mocking. Looking for this? They spun around. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the shadows near the altar, flanked by two armed men. In his hand, he held a leather-bound ledger. He smiled, the expression sharp and cruel. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out, Sylvia? You're not nearly as clever as you think. Pakawa rose slowly, his hand moving toward his knife. The two men raised their rifles. I wouldn't, Thorne said calmly. My men are excellent shots. You'd be dead before you took 2 steps. Sylvia stood, her legs trembling but her voice steady. That ledger proves everything. Every crime you've committed. Every life you've ruined. Thorne laughed. And who's going to see it? You? You're a wanted woman. The hunter? He's an Indian with no rights and no voice. Even if you made it to Santa Fe, no one would believe you. I own this territory, Sylvia. I own the law. Then why come here? Pakawa said quietly. If you're so untouchable, why not just let us run? Thorne's smile faded. Because I don't leave loose ends. Because people need to know what happens when they cross me. Because I won't let some clerk and some savage ruin everything I've built. He nodded to his men. Kill him both. Pakawa moved first. He grabbed Sylvia and shoved her behind a stone pillar as gunfire erupted. Bullets chipped the stone, sending dust and fragments flying. He drew his rifle and returned fire, dropping one of Thorne's men with a single shot. The man crumpled, clutching his chest. The second man fired again, and Pakawa grunted, staggering. Blood bloomed on his left shoulder. Sylvia screamed his name, but he didn't fall. He raised the rifle and fired again, this time hitting the second man in the leg. The man went down howling. Thorne ran, clutching the ledger, disappearing through a side door. Pakawa stumbled after him, but Sylvia caught his arm. "You're shot. I'll live. Go. Get the ledger." She hesitated, then pulled the revolver from her belt and ran. Her legs felt like lead, but she pushed through the fear, bursting out into the courtyard just in time to see Thorn mounting a horse. "Stop!" she shouted. He looked back, surprised, then laughed. "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" "You don't have the spine." She raised the gun, hands shaking. Her finger found the trigger. She remembered Pakawa's words. "Breathe out. Don't fight the recoil. Let the gun become part of you." She fired. The bullet struck Thorn in the thigh. He screamed, falling from the horse and hitting the ground hard. The ledger flew from his hands, landing in the dirt. Sylvia ran forward, snatched it up, and pointed the gun at his face. "You're right," she said, her voice cold and steady. "I'm not a hero. But I'm not helpless anymore either." Pakawa appeared behind her, blood soaking his shirt but his eyes sharp.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
He looked at Thorn writhing in the dirt, then at Sylvia standing over him with the gun, and something like pride flickered across his face. "We go." Now, they mounted up and rode hard into the night, leaving Thorn bleeding and cursing in the dirt. Behind them, shouts erupted from the town. Men were coming, drawn by the gunfire. But for now, they had the ledger. And for now, that was enough. Miles from San Marcos, they finally slowed. Pakawa swayed in the saddle, his face pale in the starlight. Sylvia guided them to a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock, where they could rest and tend to his wound. She built a small fire while he sat against the rock wall, breathing hard. She cut away his blood-soaked shirt and examined the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good, but he was losing blood. "I need to pack it," she said, tearing strips from her own petticoat. "This is going to hurt. Everything hurts," he said, attempting a smile. "Do it." She worked quickly, packing the wound with cloth and binding it tight. He didn't cry out, but she saw his jaw clench, saw the sweat bead on his forehead. When she finished, he looked at her. "You saved us back there," he said quietly. "You saved me first." She replied, "We're even then." She shook her head. "Not even close." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, the ledger resting on the ground like a promise. Tomorrow they would decide what to do next. Tomorrow they would figure out how to get the evidence to Santa Fe. But tonight, they were alive. And that was victory enough. The morning came with blood still fresh on Pakawa's shirt and a price on both their heads that had doubled overnight. Sylvia woke first, her body stiff from sleeping on hard ground. The ledger clutched against her chest like a shield. The fire had died to embers, and the air carried the sharp bite of autumn coming early to the high country. Pakawa stirred beside her, his face drawn and pale. The wound in his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but fever was setting in. She could see it in the glassy sheen of his eyes, the way his breath came shallow and quick. "We need to move," he said, trying to stand. His legs buckled, and he caught himself against the rock wall. "You need rest," Sylvia said firmly, moving to his side. "And medicine. Real medicine, not just field dressing. No time," he muttered. "They'll be tracking us by now. Clayton Rourke won't stop until he finds us. And Thorn will have every hired gun in 3 territories looking." She helped him sit back down, her mind racing. He was right about the danger, but he was also dying slowly from infection. She had seen it before when her father had been wounded in a farming accident. The fever that came after, the delirium, the way the body turned against itself. Without proper treatment, Pakawa would be dead within days. "There's a settlement," she said suddenly. "About 15 miles northeast. A mescalero camp. I saw it marked on the land office maps. They trade with some of the ranchers, sell horses and hides. Pakawa shook his head weakly. Mescalero won't help a Comanche. Old blood between our peoples. Wars that go back generations. They'll help if we offer them something they need, Sylvia said, her hand touching the ledger. This book has records of their stolen land. Names of the men who took it. Proof they can use to fight back. He looked at her through the haze of fever, calculating. You'd trust them with that? With everything we've risked to get it? I'd trust them more than I trust anyone in San Marcos, she said. And you'll die without help. So we go. We have no choice. It took nearly 4 hours to reach the Mescalero camp, moving slowly through rough terrain to avoid being spotted by any search parties. Pakawa could barely stay in the saddle by the time they arrived, slumped forward with Sylvia holding him upright from behind, her arms aching from the effort. The settlement was small, maybe 20 lodges arranged in a protective circle near a creek that ran cold and clear from the mountains. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could see women working hides, children playing with sticks and hoops. Warriors appeared before they even reached the edge of camp, materializing from the scrub brush like spirits, rifles raised, faces hard with suspicion. One of them, a man with gray streak in his long black hair and a scar running from his temple to his jaw, stepped forward. He wore a mix of traditional and white man's clothing, buckskin pants and a cotton shirt, a bandolier across his chest. You bring trouble to our home, he said in English, his accent thick but clear. We want no part of white man's wars. Sylvia dismounted carefully, keeping her hands visible and away from the revolver at her hip. We need medicine. He's been shot. We have something to trade. Something valuable. The warrior's eyes flicked. To Pakawa, then to the ledger she held clutched against her side. What is that? What could white woman and Comanche have that we need? Proof, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Proof of who stole your land. Names, dates, forged signatures, stolen deeds. Everything you'd need to take to the territorial governor. Everything you'd need to fight back. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Interest, calculation. He spoke rapidly in his own language to the others, a sharp exchange of words she couldn't follow. Then he turned back to Sylvia. I am Nacha, war leader of this band. If you lie, you both die here. Slowly, I'm not lying, Sylvia said. Look for yourself. She opened the ledger to a page she had marked earlier, one that detailed the theft of Apache grazing lands along the Pecos River. Dates, names, forged treaty signatures. Nacha took the book, his rough fingers tracing the entries with unexpected gentleness. His jaw tightened as he read, his scar whitening against his dark skin. These names, he said quietly, his voice thick with old anger. We know these names. They came with papers and soldiers 5 winters ago, took land that was ours by treaty. Land our fathers hunted. Land where our mothers are buried. It's all there, Sylvia said. Every theft, every lie, every piece of land they stole from your people, and a dozen others. But first, please, he needs help. He'll die without it. Nasha closed the book slowly and called out in Mescalero. 2 women emerged from a nearby lodge, their faces weathered and wise, their eyes sharp with knowledge of healing. They approached. Pakawa's horse without fear, speaking softly to the animal as they helped him down. He was barely conscious now, his skin burning with fever, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Bring him to the healing lodge, Nasha commanded. Then to Sylvia, his voice stern. You come with me. We will talk about this book and what it means. The healing lodge smelled of sage and cedar smoke, of herbs Sylvia couldn't name, and the earthy scent of roots being ground into paste. The 2 women worked over Pakawa with practiced efficiency, cutting away the soiled bandages with sharp knives, cleaning the wound with water steeped in plants that turned it dark green. One of them, older with silver hair braided down her Back and hands marked with old burn scars, pressed a poultice directly into the bullet hole. Pakawa gasped, his back arching off the furs beneath him, but he didn't cry out. Sylvia watched from the entrance, her hands clasped tight, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Natcha stood beside her, the ledger open. In his hands, his eyes moving slowly over page after page, his expression growing darker with each entry he read. "You worked for these men," he said. Not a question but a statement of fact. "I kept their records," Sylvia replied, shame coloring. Her voice. "I didn't know what I was recording until it was too late. I thought I was just documenting legal transactions. By the time I figured it out, by the time I understood what they were doing, I had already helped them steal from dozens of families. That's when I made a copy. That's why they tried to kill me. And the Comanche? Why does he help you?" "Comanche and Apache are not friends. Because no one else would," she said simply. "Because he lost his sister to the same kind of cruelty. Because he knows what it's like to be powerless while evil men do whatever they want." Natcha was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing the entries with something like reverence. "These men have taken much from my people, land, water rights. Grazing territory our grandfathers hunted, where our children should play. They came with law written on paper and guns to enforce it. We had no voice. No way to fight back that wouldn't end in our deaths. This could give you a voice," Sylvia said. "If we can get it to Santa Fe, to someone who'll listen, to someone who cares about justice more than profit, and you think anyone will listen to an Apache?" Natcha's voice held bitter knowledge earned through years of betrayal. "White men's law protects white men. Always has, always will, maybe," Sylvia admitted. "But doing nothing guarantees they win. At least this is a chance. At least it's something." The older woman emerged from the lodge, wiping her hands on a cloth, her face impassive. She spoke in rapid mescalero to Natcha, her words accompanied by hand gestures. He nodded slowly, his expression softening slightly. "She says the fever will break by morning if his spirit is strong," Natcha translated. "The wound was clean, no poison in the blood yet. The bullet passed through without hitting bone. He will live if he chooses to." Relief flooded through Sylvia, so suddenly her knees went weak. She had to steady herself against the lodge pole. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you so much." The woman nodded once and returned inside. Natcha closed the ledger carefully and handed it back to Sylvia, his eyes searching her face. "You will stay until he can travel," he said. "My wife will give you food and a place to sleep. But know this, white woman, if Thorn's men come here looking for you, we will not fight your war. We have lost too many warriors already. Too many sons and husbands. We will give you up to save our people." "I understand," Sylvia said, meeting his gaze directly. "I wouldn't expect anything else, do you?" Natcha's eyes were hard as flint. "We survive by being invisible, by not drawing the white man's anger, by making ourselves small and unthreatening. What you carry could destroy that fragile peace, but it could also free us from the lies that bind us. So we walk a knife's edge. Between hope and extinction." He turned and walked away, his shoulders straight despite the weight he carried, leaving Sylvia alone with her guilt and her hope tangled together like briars in her chest. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, bleeding across the horizon like an open wound, Sylvia sat beside Pakawa in the healing lodge. The fever had lessened considerably, his breathing steadier, the color returning slowly to his face. The women had given her a bowl of stew, rich with meat and root vegetables, and told her in gestures to make him drink broth when he woke. She studied his face in the dim light, filtering through the lodge's smoke hole. This man who had become her unlikely savior, and something more she was afraid to name. The sharp angles of his cheekbones, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the scars that marked his hands and arms like a map of violence survived. Each one a story of survival. Each one a battle won against impossible odds. His eyes opened. Suddenly, focusing on her with effort, confusion giving way to recognition. "Where are we?" His voice was rough, dry as desert sand. "Mescalero Camp," she said, bringing water to his lips with careful hands. "They're helping us." Natcha, their war leader, he saw the ledger. He understands what it means for his people. Pakawa drank slowly, then pushed the cup away. "Dangerous. For them. For us." "Should have kept moving. You couldn't move," she said firmly. "You were dying. You still might if you don't rest and let yourself heal." He tried to sit up, grimaced sharply, and fell back onto the furs. "How long have I been out?" "Since yesterday morning." "It's evening now. The healer says your fever will break by morning. Then we can decide what comes next. We move," he said. "Soon as I can sit a horse. Can't stay here. Too dangerous for them." "I know," she agreed softly. They sat in silence, the sounds of the camp settling around them like a blanket. Children laughing somewhere nearby. Women singing while they worked. The crackle of cooking fires. The low murmur of men's voices discussing the day's hunt. It was strange and painful to hear normal life continuing while they carried death and danger with them, like a shadow that grew longer with each passing hour. "I've been thinking," Sylvia said quietly, her hands folded in her lap, "about what happens after. If we make it to Santa Fe, if someone actually believes us, if this ledger changes anything, what then? What happens to us?" "Then you go back to your life," Pakawa said, his voice flat. "Find a new town. Start over. Maybe get married again. Live the life you should have had, and you." He was quiet for a long time, his eyes fixed on the smoke hole above them where stars were beginning to appear. "I don't have a life to go back to. This is all I know now. Moving, surviving, staying ahead of ghosts that never stop following. That's not living," Sylvia said, her voice gentle but firm. "That's just not dying. There's a difference. Same thing when you've lost everything that mattered." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. Feeling the warmth of him, the life still burning there. "Maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe we could both start over, together, build something new from all this ashes and blood." He looked at her, surprise flickering in his dark eyes like lightning in a night sky. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm saying," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear of rejection. "I'm saying I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm saying that for the first time since Charles died, I feel like I'm not just surviving day to day. I'm fighting for something. And I'm fighting alongside someone who sees me as more than just a woman to protect or a problem to solve or a burden to carry." Pakawa's hand tightened around hers, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "I can't promise you anything. No home, no safety, no certainty. Just more running, more danger, more uncertainty. Then we run together," she said simply. "And maybe someday we stop running and build something worth keeping." He pulled her closer with his good arm, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. Definitely both," she whispered. Allowing herself a small smile, they stayed like that, holding on to each other as the world outside continued its endless turning. As somewhere in the darkness, men with guns were searching and plotting. As the ledger sat between them like a promise that could save lives or end them all. The attack came at dawn, shattering the peace like a hammer through glass. Sylvia woke to shouting and gunfire, the peaceful camp erupting into chaos and terror. She grabbed the ledger and her revolver, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. Pakawa was already up despite his wound, rifle in hand, his face grim and set for battle. "Clayton Rourke," he said. "He found us." Must have tortured someone in town who saw us leave. They emerged from the lodge to see riders pouring into the camp from 3 directions. Maybe 15 men on horseback, firing indiscriminately into lodges, into crowds, into anything that moved. Women screamed, grabbing children and running for cover. Warriors returned fire from behind whatever shelter they could find. But they were outnumbered and caught completely unprepared. Natcha appeared through the smoke and chaos, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, his rifle barking methodically as he took down one of the riders. The man fell screaming from his horse. Natcha saw Sylvia and Pakawa, and his face twisted with fury and betrayal. "You brought this on us," he roared over the gunfire. "You brought death to our home. Get out. Get out now before we all die." Clayton Rourke's voice boomed across the camp, amplified by morning air and his own self-righteousness. "Give us the woman and the book and we'll leave you in peace. Harbor them, and you all burn. Every man, woman, and child." Pakawa grabbed Sylvia's arm hard. "The horses, now, we run or they die for sheltering us." They ran through the chaos, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet, screams filling the air. Sylvia's lungs burned, her legs pumping desperately. They reached the horse corral where Kita and several other horses milled nervously, eyes rolling with fear. Pakawa vaulted onto Kita despite his injury, his face going white with pain. Then reached down to pull Sylvia up behind him. "Hold tight and don't let go," he growled. They burst from the camp at a full gallop, Pakawa guiding Kita through a narrow gap in the attacker's line with skill born of desperation. Bullets whined past them like angry hornets. One tugged at Sylvia's skirt, tearing fabric. Another knocked Pakawa's hat from his head. But they broke through into open country. Behind them, the Mescalero camp burned, black smoke rising into the morning sky like a funeral pyre. Sylvia looked back once and saw Natcha standing in the center of the destruction, his rifle still firing methodically, his face illuminated by flames that consumed everything his people had built. She saw his eyes meet hers across the distance, saw the accusation there, the rage, the sorrow of a leader who had gambled on mercy and lost everything. Then they were over a ridge and into the broken country beyond, riding hard for their lives, leaving destruction and guilt and the screams of the innocent in their wake. They rode until Kita's sides heaved and foam flecked her neck, until the sun climbed high and merciless overhead, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the vast emptiness behind them. Pakawa finally slowed the mare to a walk in a canyon carved deep into red stone, where shadows offered brief respite from the brutal heat. He swayed in the saddle, his face ashen, fresh blood seeping through the bandage on his shoulder. Sylvia dismounted first, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. She reached up to help him down, and he slid from the horse with a grunt of pain, leaning heavily against her. They stumbled together to a flat rock in the shade, and he collapsed onto it, breathing hard. "Let me see," she said, already reaching for the bandage. "It's fine," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. She peeled back the blood-soaked cloth, carefully. The wound had reopened, torn by the desperate ride and the strain of controlling the horse. Fresh blood welled from the entry and exit holes, and the skin around them was hot and angry red. "It's not fine," she said, her voice tight with worry and exhaustion. "It's worse than before. We need to clean it again, pack it properly. If infection sets in now, you won't survive." "Those people back there," Pakawa said, his eyes distant and hollow. "Natcha's people. They're dead or scattered because of us. Because I was too weak to keep riding." Sylvia's hands stilled. "No, they're dead because Clayton Rourke and Marcus Thorne care more about protecting their crimes than they care about human life. Because evil men will burn down the world before they'll admit guilt. We brought the fire to their door," he said bitterly. "We didn't pull the triggers," she insisted. "Don't carry their sins on top of your own grief. You'll break under the weight." She tore more strips from her already ragged petticoat and used water from their canteen to clean the wound as best she could. There were no healing herbs here, no wise women with knowledge passed down through generations. Just her trembling hands and determination born of desperation. Pakawa watched her work, his jaw clenched against the pain. "Why are you still here?" he asked quietly. "You could have run while I was fevered. Could have taken the ledger and left me behind. Would have been smarter." "I don't want to be smart," she said, not looking up from her task. "I want to be decent." "There's a difference." She finished wrapping the wound and sat back, exhaustion settling over her like a physical weight. Her hands were covered in his blood. Her dress was torn and filthy. Her hair hung in tangled ropes. She looked like she had been dragged through hell backwards, and maybe she had been. "We need a plan," Pakawa said, straightening despite obvious pain. "Can't just keep running. They'll track us until we drop or until they corner us somewhere with no way out." Sylvia pulled out the ledger from where she had tucked it inside her bodice, the leather warm against her skin. She opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the damning entries. "Santa Fe is still 3 days hard ride from here. Maybe 4 given your condition. And they'll be watching the roads, the stage stops, anywhere we might try to get help. Then we don't take the roads," Pakawa said. "We go through the back country. Places horses can barely pass. Places they won't expect. You can barely sit upright," she pointed out. "How are you going to navigate mountain passes?" "Same way I've survived everything else," he said grimly. "By refusing to die." They rested through the heat of the day, conserving what little strength they had left. Sylvia kept watch while Pakawa dozed fitfully, his body trying desperately to heal itself. She studied the canyon walls, the narrow entrance, the single path that led deeper into the stone maze. It would be easy to trap them here. Easy to bottle them up and finish what had been started back in San Marcos. Her hand rested on the revolver at her hip, its weight now familiar, almost comforting. She thought about the woman she had been just days ago, the timid clerk who kept her eyes down and her mouth shut, who believed that following rules would keep her safe. That woman was dead, burned away in the desert sun and reborn in blood and gunpowder. As evening approached, casting long purple shadows across the canyon floor, a sound made her freeze. Hooves, multiple horses moving slowly, searching. She woke Pakawa with a hand over his mouth, her eyes wide with alarm. "Company," she whispered. They moved quickly despite his injury, leading Kita deeper into the canyon where the walls narrowed and twisted. The sound of pursuit grew louder, echoing off stone, distorted and multiplied until it seemed like an army was coming. Sylvia's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth went dry. Clayton Rourke's voice rang out, bouncing off the canyon walls. "There's only one way out of this canyon, and we're sitting in it. You can come out now and make this easy, or you can die slow when we smoke you out like rats." Pakawa looked up at the canyon walls, his eyes calculating. "Can you climb?" he asked. Sylvia followed his gaze to a narrow cleft in the rock face, a natural chimney that led upward into darkness. "I don't know, maybe why? Because they expect us to run deeper in. They won't expect us to go up and over. It's our only chance." "You can't climb with that shoulder," she protested. "I can do whatever I have to do," he said flatly. "Now move." They secured Kita in a hidden alcove with enough grass and water for days, praying the mare would stay quiet. Then they began to climb. Sylvia went first, her hands finding holds in the rough stone, her feet scrambling for purchase. Behind her, Pakawa climbed one-handed, his face twisted in agony, but his movements steady and sure. Below them, voices grew closer. Torchlight flickered against the canyon walls. Someone fired a shot that ricocheted wildly, the report deafening in the enclosed space. "I see tracks," a voice called. "Fresh ones." They went deeper in. Sylvia's hands were bleeding now, torn by sharp stone. Her arms trembled with effort, but she kept climbing, driven by fear and determination in equal measure. The cleft narrowed until she could brace her back against one wall and her feet against the other. Inching upward in painful increments, Pakawa followed, leaving blood smears on the stone from his reopened wound. His breath came in harsh gasps, but he didn't stop. Once, his foot slipped, and he hung for a terrifying moment by one hand before finding purchase again. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Sylvia's hand found the rim of the canyon. She hauled herself over the edge and immediately reached down to help Pakawa. He gripped her forearm with iron strength, and she pulled, her muscles screaming, until he rolled over the edge beside her. They lay on their backs on the flat stone above the canyon, gasping for breath, staring up at stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Below them, Clayton Rourke's men moved deeper into the canyon, their voices fading, searching in vain for prey that had escaped the trap. "We need to move," Pakawa said after a moment, though neither of them moved immediately. "Put distance between us and them before they figure it out." "I know," Sylvia said, but still she lay there, every muscle in her body protesting. "Just give me one more minute." They walked through the night across broken country, staying off ridgelines where they might be silhouetted against the sky, avoiding open ground where they would be visible. Pakawa's condition was deteriorating rapidly despite his stubborn refusal to acknowledge it. He stumbled frequently, caught himself, kept moving through sheer force of will. As dawn broke pale and cold, they reached a small settlement they hadn't expected to find. Not a town, barely even a village. Just 4 buildings clustered around a well, a way station for freight wagons traveling the back routes between territories. Smoke rose from one chimney, promising warmth and possibly food. "Too dangerous," Pakawa said immediately. "They could have riders here already, asking questions, offering rewards." "You need rest and food," Sylvia countered. "Real food, not dried meat and water. And we need information. We can't keep running blind." They compromised by approaching cautiously, Sylvia going in alone while Pakawa watched from a distance, rifle ready.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
The building with the smoking chimney turned out to be a combination store and boarding house, run by a weathered woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and flour on her hands. "Help you?" the woman asked, her gaze taking in Sylvia's torn dress and bloody hands in one quick assessment. "We need supplies," Sylvia said, keeping her voice steady. "And information if you have it. Riders from San Marcos might be in the area. Dangerous men. We're trying to avoid them." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Saw a group pass through yesterday. 15 men, maybe more. Mean looking. Asked about a woman and an Indian. Offered money for information." Sylvia's stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "Told them I mind my own business, and they should too," the woman said. "Don't trust men who travel in packs like wild dogs. Usually means they're up to no good. We can pay," Sylvia said, pulling out a few precious coins from the small pouch she had managed to keep through everything. "Not much, but something." The woman looked at the coins, then at Sylvia's face, reading something there that seemed to decide her. "Keep your money. I'll make you some food and put together supplies. But you can't stay. Those men will circle back when they don't find what they're looking for." "There's someone with me," Sylvia admitted. "He's hurt, shot, needs bandages, medicine if you have any. Bring him in the back way," the woman said. "Quick now before anyone else sees." An hour later, they sat in the woman's small kitchen, eating the first hot meal they'd had in days. Beans and cornbread and coffee so strong it could strip paint. The woman, who said her name was Ruth and offered nothing more about herself, cleaned and redressed Pakawa's wound with practiced hands. "This is bad," she said bluntly. "Needs stitching. Needs proper medicine." Needs a doctor, which is something you're not going to get out here in the middle of nowhere. We'll manage, Pakawa said. Men always say that right before they die of stubbornness, Ruth replied. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a bottle of clear liquid and a needle and thread. This is going to hurt worse than getting shot. Bite on this. She handed him a leather strap. Pakawa took it, his jaw set. Sylvia held his hand as Ruth poured the alcohol directly into the wound. His back arched and he bit down hard on the leather, but he didn't cry out. Then came the needle, piercing flesh, pulling it closed stitch by agonizing stitch. When it was done, he sat pale and shaking, sweat soaking his shirt. Ruth bandaged the wound with clean cloth and stepped back. That's the best I can do, she said. Keep it clean. Keep it dry. Pray infection doesn't set in anyway. And for God's sake, stop getting shot. I'll try, Pakawa said, managing a weak smile. Ruth packed them supplies, far more than Sylvia's meager coins could have bought. Dried meat, hardtack, coffee, matches, blankets. There's a trail about 5 miles northeast, she said as they prepared to leave. Old mining road, mostly abandoned now. Follows a creek up into the high country. It'll take you towards Santa Fe without using the main routes. Rough going, but you're out of easy options. Why are you helping us? Sylvia asked. Ruth was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. Because 30 years ago, I was running from something too. Someone helped me when they didn't have to. Figured I'd pay it forward while I still could. Thank you, Sylvia said. The words inadequate but sincere. Don't thank me yet, Ruth replied. Those men you're running from, they've got the devil in them. I can see it in how they move, how they talk. You watch yourselves. They left the way station as the sun climbed higher, following Ruth's directions toward the abandoned mining road. Behind them, the small settlement disappeared into the vast landscape, and with it their last connection to anything resembling civilization or safety. The trail Ruth had described was exactly as advertised. Rough, steep, barely passable in places. They walked more than they rode, leading Kita carefully over loose rock and around deadfalls. The creek beside the trail ran fast and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, its constant rushing filling the silence between them. By evening, they had climbed high enough that the air thinned and turned cold. They made camp in a grove of aspen trees, their white bark glowing ghostly in the twilight. Pakawa built a small fire while Sylvia tended to Kita, rubbing down the mare's legs and checking her hooves for stones. We're going to make it, Sylvia said as they sat by the fire, sharing coffee and dried meat. Another 2 days, maybe 3, and we'll be in Santa Fe. We'll find someone who'll listen. Someone who'll help. Pakawa stared into the flames, his face unreadable. And if no one listens? If we risk everything and it changes nothing, then at least we tried, she said. At least we fought. That has to count for something. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. You've changed. Since that first day. You're not the same woman who hung between those trees. No, she agreed. I'm not. She died out there in the desert. What came back is someone different. Someone harder. Maybe someone better, maybe just someone more damaged. I don't know yet. Both, he said. You're both. She moved closer to him, seeking warmth against the mountain cold. He put his good arm around her, and they sat together watching the fire burn down to embers. Watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. Watching the night deepen around them like a protective cloak. Tomorrow they would climb higher. Tomorrow they would push towards Santa Fe and the uncertain hope it represented. Tomorrow they would face whatever came next with whatever strength they had left. But tonight, for just a few hours, they allowed themselves to simply exist. Two broken people clinging to each other in the darkness. Their shared warmth, the only certainty in a world that had taken everything and demanded even more. The fire died. The stars blazed. And somewhere behind them in the vast darkness, men with guns and evil intentions continued their relentless pursuit. Santa Fe appeared before them like a mirage on the fourth day. Its adobe buildings glowing golden in the afternoon sun, church bells ringing across the valley. Sylvia felt tears sting her eyes at the sight, relief and exhaustion and fear all tangled together in her chest. They had made it. Against impossible odds, through blood and fire and loss, they had actually made it. Pakawa reigned in Kita, at the top of the ridge overlooking the territorial capital, his face grim despite their arrival. "This is where it gets dangerous," he said. "More dangerous than being shot at and hunted across 300 miles?" Sylvia asked, managing a weak smile. "Different dangerous," he replied. "Out there, we knew who the enemy was. In there, everyone wears a friendly face until they don't. Thorn has reach. Money buys influence, and influence buys silence. We walk into that city with our ledger and our accusations. We're putting a target on our backs that won't come off. We already have targets on our backs," she pointed out. "At least here we have a chance to make them mean something." They descended into the city as the sun began its slide toward the western mountains. Two ragged travelers on an exhausted horse, drawing curious stares from merchants closing their shops and women hurrying home with market baskets. Sylvia felt exposed, vulnerable, certain that every eye held recognition, that every whisper was about them. "The territorial governor's office is in the plaza," she said quietly. "Near the palace of the governors. That's where we need to go." "Not yet," Pakawa said, guiding Kita down a side street. "First we clean up. Get decent clothes. Look like people worth listening to instead of desperate refugees. Then we approach with the ledger." They found a small boarding house run by a Mexican woman who asked no questions when Sylvia paid for a room with their last coins. The woman showed them to a sparse but clean space with a narrow bed and a wash basin, then brought hot water and soap without being asked. "You rest," she said in heavily accented English, her dark eyes kind. "You look like you've been through the devil's own country." "Something like that," Sylvia murmured, when the woman left. Sylvia locked the door and turned to find Pakawa already sitting on the bed, his face gray with exhaustion. The journey had taken everything from him. The wound in his shoulder, though stitched and healing, had sapped his strength day by day. He looked like a man running on willpower alone. "Let me see it," she said, kneeling before him. He unbuttoned his shirt without protest, too tired to argue. She unwrapped the bandage carefully and examined the wound. It was healing, finally, the edges knitting together, no smell of rot or infection. Ruth's stitches had held. Against all odds he would survive this. "You should sleep," she said, rewrapping the wound with fresh cloth. "I'll watch the door. We both sleep," he said, his hand catching hers. "We're safe here. For now. And we both need rest if we're going to face what comes tomorrow." She didn't argue. They lay down together on the narrow bed, fully clothed, the ledger tucked between them like a child they were protecting. Sylvia felt his warmth along her back, his breath steady against her hair. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly rest, sinking into sleep like a stone into dark water. She woke to pounding on the door and shouting in the street below. Panic surged through her as she bolted upright, reaching for the revolver that lay on the small table beside the bed. Pakawa was already on his feet, rifle in hand, his body positioned between her and the door. "What's happening?" she whispered. More shouts from outside, but not directed at their room. The pounding continued downstairs, followed by the landlady's voice raised in angry Spanish. Pakawu moved to the window and looked down carefully. "Marshall's men," he said quietly. "Searching houses. Looking for someone." "Us," Sylvia breathed. "Maybe. Or maybe someone else. But we can't take the chance." They gathered their few possessions with practiced speed, Sylvia shoving the ledger back into her bodice while Pakawa checked his weapons. The pounding grew closer, moving up the stairs. Voices in English now, demanding and harsh. "The window," Pakawa said, already moving to it. He pushed it open and looked down at the alley below, measuring the drop. "It's high, but there's a shed roof halfway down." We jumped to that, then to the ground. "You can't jump with that shoulder," Sylvia protested. "Watch me," he said, and before she could stop him, he climbed out and dropped. She heard him hit the shed roof with a thud, then the ground. A moment later his voice floated up, tight with pain but functional. "Come on." The door to their room shook with violent pounding. "Open up. Territorial Marshal's office." Sylvia climbed onto the windowsill, her heart in her throat. Heights had always terrified her, but fear of what waited behind that door terrified her more. She jumped. The shed roof came up fast and hard, her feet hitting and sliding on loose shingles. She tumbled, barely catching herself before sliding off the edge. Then Pakawa's hands were there, steadying her, guiding her down to the alley floor. They ran as the door to their room splintered open behind them. Shouts of discovery following them into the maze of Santa Fe's back streets. Pakawa knew cities the way he knew wilderness, finding paths through shadows and tight spaces, pulling Sylvia through a labyrinth only he could see. They emerged near the plaza, breathing hard, trying to look casual among the evening crowds gathering for some festival or celebration. Colorful banners hung between buildings. Music drifted from open doorways. People laughed and talked, oblivious to the drama of pursuit playing out in their midst. "They're here ahead of us," Pakawa said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Thorn sent word. Bought the local law before we even arrived. Then who do we trust?" Sylvia asked desperately. "Who can we go to if the marshal's office is already compromised?" "The newspaper," Pakawa said suddenly. "You said your plan was always to go to a journalist. That hasn't changed. We find the newspaper office, we give them the story. Once it's public, Thorn can't buy silence anymore." They found the Santa Fe Gazette office on a side street near the plaza, a modest building with printing presses visible through the front windows. A man in shirt sleeves and ink-stained fingers was setting type when they entered, looking up with mild annoyance at the interruption. "We're closed," he said. "Come back tomorrow." "This can't wait until tomorrow," Sylvia said, pulling out the ledger. "We have evidence of land fraud, theft, and murder. Evidence that implicates some of the most powerful men in the territory." The man's expression changed, interest replacing annoyance. "I'm listening." His name was Thomas Whitmore, editor and owner of the Gazette, a transplant from Boston who had come west chasing stories and stayed for the truth nobody else wanted to tell. He listened as Sylvia laid out everything, the ledger open between them, page after damning page of Marcus Thorne's crimes. "This is extraordinary," Whitmore said, his fingers tracing the entries with reverence. "If even half of this is accurate, it's the biggest story to hit the territory in decades. It would destroy Thorne, bring down a dozen other men with him. It's all accurate," Sylvia said. "I recorded most of it myself before I understood what I was documenting. Every entry can be verified against original deeds and land grants." Whitmore looked up at her, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "And you're willing to go on record? To testify publicly about what you know?" "Yes," Sylvia said without hesitation. "They'll destroy you," Whitmore warned. "They'll call you a liar, a thief, a woman scorned or mad or worse. They'll drag your name through mud so deep you'll never climb out. And that's if they don't just kill you first." "They've already tried to kill me," Sylvia said, pulling down the collar of her dress to show the rope burns still visible on her wrists. "They strung me up between two oak trees and used me for target practice. They burned down a mescalero camp that gave us shelter. They've murdered and stolen and lied for years. I'm not afraid of what they'll say about me." Whitmore looked at Pakawa, who had remained silent throughout, standing watch by the window. "And you? What's your stake in this?" "Justice for my sister," Pakawa said quietly. And for everyone else who couldn't fight back. Whitmore nodded slowly, decision crystallizing in his expression. All right. I'll print it. Front page, full story, every detail. But it'll take time to typeset and verify the most explosive claims. I'll need at least 2 days, maybe 3. Can you stay hidden that long? We'll manage, Sylvia said. There's a place, Whitmore said, writing quickly on a piece of paper. My sister's house, outside the city. She's a widow, lives alone, won't ask questions. Go there tonight. I'll send word when the paper's ready to run. They left through the back entrance as full darkness settled over Santa Fe, slipping through alleys and side streets toward the address Whitmore had given them. Behind them, the city hummed with life and music and celebration. Unaware that in a small printing office, a story was being set in type that would shake the territory to its foundations. The widow's house sat on 5 acres of scrubland north of the city. A small adobe structure with a garden and a chicken coop and blessed isolation. The woman who answered their knock was perhaps 40, with graying hair and suspicious eyes that softened slightly when Sylvia explained Thomas had sent them. He said you'd be coming, the widow said, stepping aside. Said you were in trouble and needed somewhere to hide. Didn't say what kind of trouble, and I didn't ask. That's how we do things in this family. Her name was Margaret Whitmore, and she treated them with efficient kindness, feeding them a simple meal of chicken and vegetables from her garden, showing them to a small room with 2 beds, providing clean water and towels without comment on their ragged appearance. Stay as long as you need, she said. My brother's a good man. If he says you deserve help, that's enough for me. That night, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, Sylvia stood in the small garden behind the house, staring up at stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear desert air. She heard Pakawa approach, his footsteps quiet but not silent. Can't sleep? He asked. Too many thoughts, she said. We're so close. In 2 days, maybe 3, the truth comes out. And then what? What happens to us? We survive, he said. Same as we've been doing. Is that enough? She asked, turning to face him. Just surviving? Just existing day to day with no thought for tomorrow or next week or next year? He was quiet for a long moment, his face half in shadow. I don't know how to think about tomorrow anymore. For 5 years, all I've done is move. No plans, no hopes, just motion. It's kept me alive, but you're right. It's not living. Sylvia stepped closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. When this is over, when the story runs and we've done everything we can, I want to find a place. A real place. Not hiding, not running. Just living. And I want you there with me. I'm not a good bet for that kind of life, he said, but his hand tightened around hers. I'm broken in ways that don't heal, so am I, she said. But maybe broken things can build something new together. Maybe that's the only way it works. He pulled her close, his good arm around her waist, his forehead resting against hers. If we live through this, he said quietly, if the story runs and we're not dead or arrested or disappeared, then yes. We find a place. We try, promise? She whispered, promise, he said, and kissed her gently, carefully, like she was something precious that might break. The next 2 days passed in agonizing slowness. Margaret kept them fed and hidden, bringing news from town when she went for supplies. The marshal's men were still searching, she reported. Strangers had been seen asking questions at boarding houses and saloons. Reward posters had appeared offering $500 for information, leading to the capture of a woman and an Indian wanted for theft and murder. Murder? Sylvia said, her voice hollow. They're accusing us of murder now? Says you killed a land office clerk during a robbery, Margaret said. Claims you shot him in cold blood when he tried to stop you from stealing files. That's a lie, Sylvia said. I never killed anyone. The only clerk in that office was me. Don't matter if it's true, Margaret said grimly. Matters if people believe it. And people usually believe whatever the powerful want them to believe. On the morning of the third day, Thomas Whitmore arrived at his sister's house in a wagon, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "It's done," he said. "The story runs tomorrow morning. Every detail, every name, every crime. I've already sent copies to newspapers in Albuquerque and Denver, just in case something happens to me or to the Gazette. Will it be enough?" Sylvia asked, "Honest truth?" "I don't know," Whitmore said. "But it's a start. Once the public knows, once other papers pick it up, Thorne can't make it disappear. He'll have to answer for it, or he'll try to silence everyone who knows." Pakawa said. "That too," Whitmore admitted. "Which is why I'm getting my sister out of town for a few weeks. And why you two need to decide if you're staying or running." Sylvia looked at Pakawa. They didn't need words anymore. She could read the answer in his eyes. "We stay," she said. "We see this through." The Santa Fe Gazette hit the streets at dawn, and by mid-morning, the territory was on fire. Crowds gathered in the plaza reading the story aloud to those who couldn't read. Men shouted and argued. Women wept for stolen homes and murdered husbands. The governor's office was mobbed with demands for justice, for investigations, for arrests, and somewhere in that chaos, Marcus Thorne read the story that would end him, and began planning his final move. The summons came before noon. Not from Marcus Thorne or his hired guns, but from the territorial governor himself. A formal letter delivered by an official courier, requesting Sylvia Price's immediate presence at the palace of the governors to provide testimony regarding the allegations, published in that morning's Gazette. The letter guaranteed her safety and promised a full investigation. "It's a trap," Pakawa said immediately, crumpling the letter in his fist. "They'll arrest you the moment you walk through that door. Lock you up on those false murder charges and lose the key." "Maybe," Sylvia said, taking the letter from him and smoothing it out. "Or maybe the governor actually wants the truth. Maybe the story created enough public pressure that he has no choice but to act. And if you're wrong, then I die having tried," she said simply. "But I won't hide anymore. I won't let fear make my decisions. We came here to expose the truth. That's what I'm going to do." Thomas Whitmore arrived an hour later with unexpected news. "The governors called for a public hearing," he said, his eyes bright with vindication. "Not a closed-door meeting, but an open forum in the plaza. Says any citizen who has grievances related to land fraud can come forward and testify. It's unprecedented. It's politics," Pakawa said darkly. "He's protecting himself, making a show of justice while the real criminals slip away." "Maybe," Whitmore admitted. "But it's also an opportunity. The whole territory will be watching. Thorne can't make you disappear in front of hundreds of witnesses. And if enough people come forward, if enough voices speak truth, even bought politicians have to listen." The hearing was set for late afternoon, giving time for word to spread throughout Santa Fe and the surrounding settlements. By the time Sylvia and Pakawa made their way to the plaza, accompanied by Whitmore, and protected by a crowd of supporters who had read the story and believed, the space was packed with humanity. Farmers who had lost land, widows whose husbands had died under suspicious circumstances, merchants who had been undercut by Thorne's monopolies, and Apache and Pueblo people who had watched their treaty land stolen piece by piece. A platform had been erected in the center of the plaza, with the territorial governor seated at a table flanked by the territorial attorney general and 3 appointed judges. Armed guards stood at attention, though whether they were there to keep the peace or to arrest her, Sylvia couldn't tell. Governor William Bradford was a heavy-set man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and the bearing of someone comfortable with power. He called the hearing to order with a gavel strike that cut through the crowd's murmur like a blade. "We are here," he announced in a voice trained to carry. to investigate serious allegations of corruption and fraud published in this morning's Gazette. Miss Sylvia Price, you will approach and present your evidence." Sylvia walked to the platform on legs that trembled but held. She carried the ledger in both hands like a sacred text. Behind her, she felt Paco's presence, a solid wall of support even though he remained in the crowd. She climbed the steps and stood before the governor, facing not just him but the hundreds of people who had gathered to hear truth spoken aloud. "I was a clerk in Marcus Thorne's land office in San Marcos," she began, her voice quiet at first but growing stronger with each word. "For 2 years, I recorded transactions I believed were legal. I documented land sales, property transfers, deed registrations. I was good at my job, precise, thorough. I never questioned what I was recording because I trusted the system." She opened the ledger to the first marked page. Then I began to notice patterns. Properties that were sold multiple times to different buyers. Deeds with forged signatures. Land grants that violated existing treaties. I started keeping a second record, a copy of everything that seemed wrong. And what I found was systematic theft on a scale I couldn't comprehend. Governor Bradford leaned forward. "These are serious accusations. Do you have proof beyond your own testimony?" "Every entry in this ledger can be verified against official records," Sylvia said, her voice ringing clear. "Every forged signature can be compared to genuine ones. Every stolen property can be traced back to its rightful owner. The proof exists if you're willing to look. And why should we believe you?" A voice called from the side. Marcus Thorne himself stepped into view, walking with a cane to favor his wounded leg, but dressed immaculately in a dark suit that spoke of wealth and power. "This woman is wanted for murder and theft. She's a criminal making desperate accusations to save herself." The crowd erupted in shouts, some supporting Thorne, more condemning him. Bradford struck his gavel repeatedly until order returned. "Mr. Thorne, you'll have your opportunity to respond," the governor said. "For now, let the witness continue." Sylvia met Thorne's eyes across the plaza, saw the hatred there, the promise of violence barely restrained. But she didn't look away. "Marcus Thorne orchestrated the murder of my employer and mentor, Circuit Judge Charles Bellamy," she said, each word deliberate and clear. "Judge Bellamy discovered the fraud and was preparing to expose it. He was killed and his death made to look like an accident. I have documents showing that the men who killed him were paid from Thorne's private accounts." "Lies!" Thorne shouted. "She's lying to protect herself." "Then let's verify," Sylvia said, turning back to the governor. "Subpoena the bank records. Interview the witnesses. Investigate Judge Bellamy's death properly instead of accepting the convenient explanation. If I'm lying, the evidence will show it." Bradford exchanged glances with his advisors, then nodded slowly. "The court will order a full investigation, Mr. Thorne. You are not to leave Santa Fe until this matter is resolved." "On what authority?" Thorne demanded. "I'm a respected businessman, not some common criminal." "On the authority granted to me as territorial governor," Bradford said, his voice hardening. "And if you're innocent as you claim, you have nothing to fear from investigation." Movement at the edge of the crowd caught Sylvia's attention. Clayton Rourke and a dozen armed men were pushing through, hands on weapons, faces set with grim purpose. Pacowa saw them too and moved to intercept, his rifle coming up. "That's far enough," Pacowa said, his voice cutting through the tension. "You draw those guns in this crowd, innocent people die. Is that what you want?" Rourke stopped, his hand on his revolver but not drawing. "We're here on legal business. Got a warrant for that woman's arrest." "Murder and theft. Warrant issued by whom?" Bradford demanded. "I've authorized no such arrest. County judge in San Marcos," Rourke said, pulling a paper from his coat. "Legal and binding. Not in Santa Fe it's not," Bradford said. "And certainly not during an official territorial hearing. You and your men will stand down or face charges yourselves." The standoff held for a long, breathless moment. Then Nasha stepped forward from the crowd, his scarred face impassive, but his presence commanding. Behind him came 24 Mescalero warriors, armed but not threatening. Simply present. "We came to speak," Nasha said in his heavily accented English. "About stolen land. About murdered people. About promises broken and laws ignored. We came to tell truth." Bradford looked startled, clearly not expecting Apache testimony. "You have evidence related to these allegations?" "We have memory," Nasha said. "Memory of land taken. Of families driven away. Of children who starved when hunting grounds were stolen. Your papers and deeds, they mean nothing to us. But this woman's book, it speaks our truth in white man's words." He gestured to several other Apache men who stepped forward, each carrying documents, treaty copies, correspondence. "We kept papers too. Every lie, every broken promise. Now we show them." The hearing continued for hours as witness after witness came forward. Farmers who had been cheated. Merchants who had been threatened. Even some of Thorne's own former employees who, emboldened by the public forum and the protection of the crowd, testified to crimes they had witnessed or participated in under coercion. Clayton Rourke and his men stood helpless as the case against Thorne built like a wall of stone. Each testimony another brick, until the structure of corruption stood revealed for all to see. Thorne's face grew progressively paler, his protests weaker, his lies more transparent. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plaza, Governor Bradford called for a recess. "This court will reconvene tomorrow morning," he announced, "at which time I will render preliminary findings and order appropriate arrests. Mr. Thorne, you will remain in custody of the territorial marshal pending investigation. This is outrageous." Thorne shouted as guards moved to take him into custody. "I'm being railroaded by a mob. I demand my rights." "You'll have every right afforded by law," Bradford said coldly. "The same rights you denied to the people you stole from." As guards led Thorne away, he turned back to Sylvia one last time. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and venomous. "I'll destroy you. If it takes everything I have left, I'll see you hang." "You already tried that," Sylvia said quietly. "It didn't work." The crowd erupted in cheers as Thorne was taken away, but Sylvia felt no triumph, only exhaustion. She walked down from the platform on unsteady legs, and Pakawa was there to catch her, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. "It's done," he said quietly. "You did it. We did it," she corrected, leaning into him. Together, Nasha approached them, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he simply looked at them, and Sylvia braced herself for accusation. "For blame for the attack on his camp, you kept your word," he said finally. "The book speaks truth. Our land, our stolen rights, they are recorded now in white man's law. Maybe it changes nothing. Maybe it changes everything. But at least truth was spoken." "I'm sorry," Sylvia said, tears burning her eyes. "About your camp. About the people who died because they helped us." Natchez shook his head. "We chose to help. We knew the risk. Those who died, they died fighting for something that mattered. That is better than dying for nothing, which is what has happened to our people for too many years." He extended his hand to Pakawa, who took it in the Comanche fashion, gripping forearms. "You are a good warrior," Natchez said. "Your sister would be proud." Then he and his people melted back into the crowd, disappearing as quietly as they had come. The investigation that followed moved with surprising speed, driven by public outrage and political necessity. Within a week, Marcus Thorne was formally charged with fraud, theft, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. Clayton Rourke and a dozen others were arrested as accomplices. The false murder charges against Sylvia were dismissed, and the territorial government issued a formal apology for the treatment she had endured. But legal victory brought no joy. Too many had died. Too many lives had been destroyed. The Mescalero camp that had sheltered them was gone, its survivors scattered. Judge Bellamy and Pakawa's sister remained dead. Beyond any justice the courts could provide, 3 months later. As autumn painted the high country in shades of gold and crimson, Sylvia and Pakawa stood on a plot of land 40 miles north of Santa Fe, 20 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, granted to them by a territorial government eager to make amends. They had spent weeks building a small cabin, its log walls solid and tight against coming winter. "It's not much," Pakawa said, surveying their work. "It's everything," Sylvia corrected, taking his hand. "It's home." They had married quietly a month earlier, in a ceremony that combined both their traditions. Witnessed by Thomas Whitmore and Margaret and a handful of friends they had made in Santa Fe, the territorial clerk had raised an eyebrow at a white woman marrying a Comanche. But the times were changing, slowly, painfully. And by then Sylvia Price was too well known to be denied. She went by Sylvia Grady now, though some still called her by her maiden name, recognizing the woman who had faced down corruption and won. She didn't mind either way. Names were just sounds. What mattered was the life they represented. They raised horses, breeding Kita with a strong stallion Pakawa had traded for, planning for a future measured in generations rather than days. Neighbors, both white and Apache, came to them for help with disputes over land and water rights, trusting them to be fair arbiters. Sylvia kept meticulous records, her clerk's training put to better use now. Some nights when the wind blew hard from the south, Sylvia dreamed of hanging between 2 oak trees, of bullets cutting the air around her, of flames consuming an innocent camp. She would wake gasping, and Pakawa would hold her until the trembling stopped, understanding without words, because he had his own nightmares. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sun set. "Everything we went through, everything we lost, everyone who died. Did it change enough to justify the cost?" Pakawa was quiet for a long time, his hand holding hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm the way he did when he was thinking deeply. "I don't know," he said finally. "Thorns in prison, but there are 100 more like him. Some Apache families got their land back, but most didn't. The law is still written by people with power to protect people with power. Nothing's perfect." "But something changed," Sylvia pressed. "Yes," he agreed. "Something changed. People spoke truth who had been silent. Others saw that truth could be spoken without the world ending. That's not nothing." She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sky burn orange and red. "I don't regret it," she said. "I don't regret any of it. Not the fear, not the pain, not the running. Because it brought me here. To you. To this life. I don't regret it either," he said. "For 5 years I was dead, just moving through a world that didn't want me. You made me alive again. You gave me something to fight for besides ghosts." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. The same stars that had watched them flee through canyons and mountains, that had witnessed their desperate struggle for survival. But now those stars looked down on something different. Not just survival, but life. Actual, messy, complicated, beautiful life. A rider appeared on the road, silhouetted against the fading light. They tensed instinctively, old habits dying hard, hands moving toward weapons that were always close. But as the rider drew near, they recognized Thomas Whitmer's lanky frame. "Evening," he called, dismounting. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Never," Sylvia said, standing to greet him. "What brings you all this way?" Whitmore pulled a newspaper from his saddlebag, his face animated with excitement. "Thought you'd want to see this. New York Times picked up your story. Ran a full feature about territorial corruption and the woman who exposed it. They're calling you a hero of the age." Sylvia took the paper, scanning the article with disbelief. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got tired of being afraid. That's what heroes are, Whitmore said with a smile. Just ordinary people who decided fear wasn't enough reason to stay quiet. He stayed for dinner, sharing news from Santa Fe and the wider territory. More reforms were coming, he reported. New laws to protect land rights. Requirements for deed verification. A special commission to investigate past frauds. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't justice for everyone who had been wronged. But it was movement in the right direction after Whitmore left. Sylvia and Pakawa stood together in their doorway, looking out at land that was truly theirs. At a life they had built from blood and courage and stubborn refusal to surrender. Do you ever think about that first day? Sylvia asked. When you rode in and cut me down? Every day, Pakawa said. Do you wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden past? If you'd minded your own business like everyone else? I tried minding my own business for 5 years, he said. It nearly killed me. Helping you saved us both. She turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him gently. Then I'm glad you didn't ride past. I'm glad you stopped. I'm glad you said those words that changed everything. Cut her down, or I shoot you, he recalled with the ghost of a smile. Best words anyone ever said on my behalf, she replied. They went inside as night settled over their little homestead, closing the door on a world that had tried to destroy them and failed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles, new reasons to fight. But tonight they had this. 4 walls they had built with their own hands. A fire in the hearth, and each other outside. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods they had planted, carrying stories across the high desert. Stories of a woman who had hung between 2 oak trees and refused to die. Of a hunter who had lost everything and found a reason to live. Of justice spoken in the face of power. And truth that refused to be silenced. And somewhere far to the south, 2 old oak trees stood in the desert, their branches still bearing faint scars from ropes that had hung there. But the ropes were gone now, cut down and burned. The trees remained, witnesses to cruelty that had been answered with courage, to silence that had been broken by voices that would not be stilled. The wind sang through those branches, carrying the story forward, ensuring it would not be forgotten. And in a small cabin 40 miles north of Santa Fe, 2 people who had survived the impossible slept peacefully, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of tomorrow. 2 years later, the child's laughter rang through the valley like church bells, pure and bright against the morning air. Sylvia stood at the window of their expanded cabin, watching as Pakawa chased their daughter through the autumn grass. The little girl shrieking with delight every time he pretended to catch her and miss, Nadua. They had named her after his sister, giving that stolen life a second chance through this new one. She was 18 months old now, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's dark eyes, fearless and curious about everything the world offered. The cabin had grown along with their family. 2 additional rooms, a proper kitchen, a workshop where Pakawa crafted saddles and bridles that ranchers came from 3 territories to buy. Sylvia had converted 1 room into an office where she helped families navigate the new land rights legislation, filling out forms and filing claims for people who couldn't read or write English. She did it for free, always. The work was her penance and her purpose. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Natcha standing on the porch, older now, his gray hair fully white, but his eyes still sharp. Beside him stood a young Apache woman holding a baby. Natcha, Sylvia said warmly, embracing him in the way she had learned from his people. Come in, please. Pakawa will be so glad to see you. The war leader had become a regular visitor over the past 2 years, bringing news from the Mescalero bands and occasionally families who needed help with legal matters. The attack on his camp had scattered his people, but slowly they had regrouped, rebuilt, survived as they always had. I bring someone to meet you, Natcha said, gesturing to the young woman. This is my granddaughter Kiona. She wishes to learn the white man's writing. To help our people as you do. Sylvia looked at the young woman, seeing determination in her eyes that reminded her of her younger self. I would be honored to teach her, she said. They sat at the large table Pakawa had built, drinking coffee while Nadua climbed fearlessly into Nacha's lap, fascinated by the beadwork on his shirt. The old warrior's stern face softened as he spoke to the child in Mescalero, making her giggle with stories only they understood. There is news from Santa Fe, Nacha said, switching back to English. The trial has concluded. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. He will die behind those walls. Sylvia nodded slowly. She had testified at the trial 6 months ago, the final time she would have to face the man who had tried to destroy her. He had looked small in the courtroom, diminished, a monster revealed as merely a greedy man whose schemes had collapsed around him. Clayton Rourke turned witness, Nacha continued. Gave names of others involved in exchange for lighter sentence. Many powerful men have fallen. The governor himself is under investigation. Good, Pakawa said, entering with dirt on his hands from the morning's work. He greeted Nacha with the respect due an elder, then settled beside Sylvia with Nadua crawling into his arms. Let them all fall. Maybe the next ones will be better. Or maybe they won't. But at least we made them answer for their crimes. The commission returned land to 43 Apache families, Naka said. Not all that was stolen. Not even half. But more than we had before you spoke truth. My people remember this. They remember what you risked, later, after Nacha and Kiona had left with promises to return the following week to begin lessons. Sylvia and Pakawa stood together watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. Nadua slept in Pakawa's arms, her small hand clutching his shirt. Do you ever think about that day? Sylvia asked softly. The oak trees. Clayton Rourke and his gun. How close it came to ending before it began. Every time I look at you, Pakawa said. Every time I wake up beside you. Every time I hold our daughter. I think about how I almost rode past. Almost minded my own business, almost let fear make my choices. I'm glad you didn't, she said, leaning against him carefully so as not to wake the child. Me too, he said. For 5 years I was haunted by my sister's death, by my failure to save her. I thought I would carry that ghost until I died. But you gave me something better than forgetting. You gave me a reason to honor her memory by protecting someone else. A rider appeared on the road, and Sylvia tensed reflexively before recognizing Thomas Whitmore's familiar silhouette. Old habits of vigilance died hard. He comes bearing news, I think, Pakawa said. Look how fast he rides. Whitmore dismounted in a cloud of dust, his face flushed with excitement. Congress approved it, he said without preamble. The Territorial Land Rights Act, federal oversight of all property transfers, mandatory verification of deeds, protections for treaty lands. It's not perfect, but it's real. And it's largely because of your case, Sylvia. Your testimony changed everything. Sylvia felt tears sting her eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. How many people will this help? Thousands, Whitmore said. Maybe tens of thousands over time. You planted seeds that day in the plaza. Now they're bearing fruit. After Whitmore left, Sylvia stood alone in her garden as twilight deepened into night. She thought about all the people who had suffered for those seeds to be planted. Judge Bellamy, who had died trying to expose the truth. Pakawa's sister Nadua, hanged for a crime she didn't commit. The Mescalero families scattered by the attack on their camp. So many lost, so much pain, but also so much gained. Families reunited with stolen land. Children who would grow up with rights protected by law. A daughter who would never know the fear her mother had known, who would be raised by parents who had fought for justice and won. Pakawa joined her in the garden, his hand finding hers in the darkness. What are you thinking? That it was worth it, she said firmly. Every moment of terror, every drop of blood, every nightmare I still have. It was worth it because something changed. We changed it. Together, he said. Always together. She agreed. They walked back to their cabin hand in hand, to the life they had built from ashes and courage, to the daughter who slept peacefully unaware of the battles fought, so she could live free. The door closed behind them with a soft click, shutting out the night and the ghosts of the past. And somewhere far to the south, 2 oak trees stood in the desert, their branches moving gently in the wind. The scars from the ropes had faded. With time, grown over with new bark, healed by seasons of sun and rain. They would stand for generations, silent witnesses to cruelty, answered with courage, to a woman who refused to die, and to the hunter who said the words that changed 2 lives forever. Cut her down or I shoot you. 5 words that became a promise kept, a future earned, and a legacy that would echo through the territory for generations to come.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.